Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest book talk. We are so excited to have you all here. My name is Emily May. I'm the co-founder and executive director over here at Right to Be, a nonprofit organization dedicated to building a world free of harassment and filled with humanity. And I'm joined here today by my co-visionary, co-author, BFF, Jorge Arteaga. Jorge, welcome. So excited to have you joining us today. Jorge and I wrote this book together, I've Got Your Back, The Indispensable Guide to Stopping Harassment When You See It. And we are so proud to be in conversation today with some amazing folks about this, around this book. So in addition to Jorge, we have today joining us Maya Visvari. Maya, come on in. Welcome. So Maya and I have been working together, and Maya's been working with our organization now for 2 years, I want to say, maybe longer in different contexts. But Maya's here actually as a leader of the movement to address street harassment. Maya and her team in DC passed the first ever worldwide bill that we know of anyway in the world to establish a task force in DC to actually address street harassment, but not just gender-based street harassment, to address street harassment in all of its forms across all identities that it impacts, knowing that it impacts all of those identities differently. Maya also worked on a massive report really surveying the DC community to learn what folks in DC wanted. And one of those things that they wanted was bystander intervention training. So we partnered with Maya a little over a year ago on Stand Up Against Street Harassment, also in partnership with L'Oreal Paris, to help to train as many folks in DC in how to intervene when they see street harassment as humanly possible. And as an exciting update to that story, we actually, at the end of this June, modeled a bill in New York City exactly off of what had happened in DC, including looking at harassment in all of its forms against all the identities, including underscoring that piece around not increasing or endorsing criminalization as a strategy to address harassment. And very, very proud to see that launching and to see Maya's incredible work scaling here in New York City. So welcome, Maya. Next up, we have in the room joining us Nadine Hoffman from the International Women's Media Foundation. Nadine and I have been working together for a couple years, I want to say, maybe more, and working together specifically on this issue of online harassment. As you can imagine, working in a women's media foundation, journalists are at the heart of a lot of the harassment that we're seeing online, especially female journalists, and not just here in the US, but obviously globally. And so Nadine is working on this issue from that perspective, right? How do we protect people's ability to be their full selves online, to speak their truth online, to be journalists, to protect media, and has put together an incredible online harassment resource hub and resource group of organizations all around the world who are doing this work. And we're proud to be part of that work as well. And International Women's Foundation is also a key partner of ours on our initiative Heart Mob to address online harassment and support people in being bystanders in that work. So welcome, Nadine. And last but not least, Victoria Vilk. Welcome in, Victoria. Victoria and I, again, I think we met like early pandemic. You came to a training and you were like, let's do this for online harassment. So Victoria thought partnered with us to develop, and Pen America thought partnered with us to develop our bystander intervention to address online harassment curriculum, which has now been, locked into this book. It is a key part of that book. So we're so grateful to Victoria and her thought leadership and brilliance, and still today we are co-delivering these trainings together in the universe. So that's us. We're here together today. Welcome to all of our guests. So I want to open up the floor with the first question today of, we sent you the book. Before you even opened it up, what were you excited to read about?
I'm happy to kick this off. I think I was just excited that this book existed, Emily, because we've talked for such a long time, partners here on the screen and others about the need for additional resources, and particularly, the angle that we come at it, as you mentioned, is around addressing the threats that journalists face, and particularly the online attacks that journalists are facing. But to have this really deep dive and meticulous sort of unpacking of various strategies that everyone can use, regardless of industry, to really be able to be effective allies and bystanders was really exciting. And also, when I did open the book, I was also happy to see and excited to read that there's specifically a section around trauma and resilience, because I think that that is a part that having those concrete strategies to address is super important. So I was excited to read it.
Thanks, Nadine. And just to give us a little more context before we let you go, IWMF started the Coalition Against Online Harassment, of which we, and I know PEN America, are also proud partners. Can you tell us a little bit about the coalition, and also what you've learned about the needs in the field around online harassment as a result?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So we started our Coalition Against Online Violence back in 2020, and it's now over 60 members, and very proud to be partnering with both you, Emily, and Victoria on that coalition. But the idea is really to bring together individuals and organizations working in different spaces. So not just in media, but also in civic tech and human rights and feminist spaces, both in the US and internationally, to really try to figure out how we can raise our voices collectively on the issue of attacks of women's voices in public spaces, really, but also like how we can better coordinate the very good work that we're all doing to make sure that folks are aware of it, copying best practices and models that are working from one sector to another, and really just to unite and say, we're here to stand up against this.
I love that. Thank you so much, Nadine. Maya, what about you? What were you excited about?
I think I was excited about the deep dive of bystander intervention, and just the availability of the content, I guess. I know sometimes folks hold the bystander intervention content close to the vest, and understandably, it's their own curriculum that they've created, but I like how this book kind of makes it more accessible and really goes into all of the D's.
Yeah, thank you for that, Maya. Yeah, we're here for building the movement, and the movement needs some information. One of the things that I mentioned at the top that came out of the report that you all did was the community interest in more bystander intervention trainings for the community. Did that data surprise you? Did you think folks were going to be asking for something else?
It did not surprise me, because I've been in this field of bystander intervention, and I know that that bystander intervention is kind of the gold standard for violence prevention work, and also at the core of it, it's really making sure people aren't alone, right? And that's what folks really want at the end of the day, especially if they've experienced harassment or trauma of a sort.
Yeah, that is the key to healing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that we've learned in our work on HeartMob through trauma experts, actually, that Nadine has referred us to, is that to heal, it requires establishing a sense of safety, establishing narrative, and then community, right? And I think bystander intervention is such a core part of feeling like you are a valued member of the community.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So let me turn it over to Victoria. Victoria, what were you excited about?
Well, because we built this curriculum around online abuse bystander intervention training, I knew the 5Ds pretty well, but what I was really excited about was that I knew it was going to be chock full of lived concrete examples.
Yeah.
And it did not disappoint in that way. And I find that critically important, because I think it's one thing to kind of understand in the abstract. One thing I love about the 5Ds is they're very easy to remember. It's like a really kind of catchy framework, right? but in the abstract, I know what each of the Ds means, but it's quite different when you read concrete examples of people who have tried to apply them in their own life and how it's worked and what worked. So I was really excited about that. And it really is chock full. So I really recommend it for that reason alone. And then the other thing I was excited about was that because I know you and I know Jorge and I know the ethos of Right to Be, I knew that it would approach this sort of issue of bystander intervention with a very much an intersectional lens and thinking about the ways in which the identity that you have might make your experience of harassment different, whether you're an ally or someone on the direct receiving end. So I'm very grateful that that is the kind of thread that runs through the whole book.
Yeah. And you've more or less written a book on online harassment. The field guide that you've written on online harassment is I think probably longer than I've got your back at this point. You put so much time, effort and love into it, and really have been leading the way in terms of establishing this communication around allyship, right? Like, what does it effectively mean to show up as an ally, and what does that mean in in a workplace context, like journalists, for example? Like, what does that mean to show up for your coworker? And you've done a lot of work and a lot of trainings in newsrooms. I'm interested to hear from your perspective, like, what have you learned about allyship through those journeys?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I now run this online abuse defense program, but I had never intentionally set out to do that. It just evolved organically. It started with a field manual. And then people came to us asking, newsrooms and publishers came to us asking if we could condense some of the content into a training. And so we built one from scratch, and it's evolved into an entire program with multiple workshops and trainings, some of which I do with you, Emily, some of which we do with IWMF in terms of exchanging information, ideas, and resources. And so I think what I've been struck by before the pandemic, when I was traveling to a lot of newsrooms and publishers in person, I was struck by how much people had been holding it all in. There's a perception in amongst writers and journalists that it's somehow part of the job, that you have to be able to withstand endless amounts of abuse online and offline to do your job. And so people bury it and they internalize it. And that's sometimes because they've been met dismissively when they try to say that they're having a problem. And it's sometimes because it's just a kind of culture ethos that people think is there, that they can't speak about what's happening to them. And so what I find really striking is how much it means to people to be able to finally let it out, to speak to their colleagues and their bosses about what's happening and to feel safe doing so. And then what it means when their colleagues turn to them and say, I had no idea this was happening to you. Please reach out to me. I will reach out to you if I see this happening. And then we talk through concrete strategies about, well, if you want to help your colleague, what are safe ways that you can do that? What are ways that you can do that might not put you at risk, that might exacerbate the situation? And I've learned many of those techniques actually through my work with Right to Be. Like, what are good strategies for intervention and allyship, and what are strategies that might actually accidentally do harm to yourself or to the other person? And so I've just been struck by how much it means to people when they finally speak openly about what's happening, and when they finally have other people have their back publicly or privately. It's really powerful.
Yeah, I love that. And I think what's interesting about journalism as a profession, is people are saying, "Oh, that's the price you pay for being a woman. That's the price you pay for being gay. It's the price you pay for being black," right? But you can't actually erase those identities, whereas people can and do leave journalism as a result of, the online harassment that they face, which then, messes us all up. We need more women journalists in the world if we're going to get anywhere. Let me pass the torch over to Jorge for the next question.
Thanks, Emily. So y'all took a leap to partner with us, and it's been an amazing ride. Some of the work that we've gotten to accomplish together, like training over 250,000 people, relaunching Heart Mob last November, to better support folks experiencing online harassment who need resources and want to share their stories. So I'm grateful for that. But, could you share with us, why do you think, and some of y'all have alluded to this a little bit, and when you've talked about your work, why do you think bystander intervention is so important to the work that y'all do? And so I will start off with Maya.
Sure, thank you. So bystander intervention is important to the work at the DC Office of Human Rights because it really, I think, embodies DC values. So our office generally adjudicates complaints of discrimination. But I kind of wonder what if that discrimination could have been stopped before it escalated to the incident that brought the complainant into our office. So a bystander could have intervened and potentially prevented the harm. So additionally, OHR works with other agencies and the government to like strategically prevent hate bias incidences and hate crimes. So bystander intervention is a powerful tool in that prevention work. And if folks in DC know what harassment or hate looks like, and they feel confident and equipped to intervene, our community could feel a lot safer.
Victoria, could you speak more to that as well? I know you started to talk about, journalists and them knowing that, they don't have to, that there is options, there are other resources, there are ways they can support each other. So can you maybe talk a little bit more about how bystander intervention has been important to that work?
Sure. And I do just want to point out that it's journalists, but it's also writers, artists, basically people who are trying to use their voice creatively or as part of their profession or both to speak. And the same sort of impacts we see on journalists of color or women journalists, LGBTQ journalists, and that they're being deliberately driven out of online spaces is also happening to fiction writers and poets and playwrights and all those folks. And I think that those are the voices we need on the internet and off the internet. But in terms of your question about like why bystander intervention is so important, if you're because we're focused very much on digital safety and online abuse. And the reason it's important is that when I started doing this work, we were very focused on self-defense, right? Self-defense training, self-defense resources. And that's critically important, but that can't be the whole picture because we have to tackle the problem systematically and systemically, right? We can't only have it be the responsibility of the people under attack to defend themselves. And so when you start to back out and think, well, what are systemic solutions to this problem? Some of the systemic solutions are to talk to employers and to help institutions figure out how to support their own people when they're under attack online and offline. Some of the systemic, solutions look at legislation and, where the government fits in to protect people, but then some of it is actually creating a culture online and off where it's not acceptable to harass people, where it's not the cost of doing business. It's just something that we all know is not something you should do. It's not something that is accepted or sort of encouraged in society, but the opposite, right? We have people who feel empowered to step in and say, hey, I'm not going to just watch this silently and pretend it's not happening. I'm going to step in and try to break the cycle of violence. And so I think any kind of work on online abuse has to involve bystander intervention and allyship, training, resources, et cetera, because that's the only way that we are going to push back against this problem at scale.
Thank you so much, Victoria. And Nadine, do you want to share some of how, why bystander intervention is important for the work IWMF is doing?
I think I would echo a lot of what Victoria said because we're both sort of working in similar spaces with journalists. That a big priority of ours at the IWMF is sort of the holistic safety of journalists and particularly the duty of care that the news industry has to those journalists. So I think that something that is really useful about the bystander intervention approach, and particularly this book, is that it gives really concrete tools for everyone, whether that's a manager or whether that's just, a colleague, whether that's someone you don't know, about how you can actually do something tangible and real to help someone who's in need. And particularly, through the lens we look at that would be someone who's perhaps being harassed it could be by a source, it could be by a colleague, someone who's being harassed virtually or in real time. So to actually have a playbook that gives people something to do, I think, rather than sort of just throwing up your hands like, oh, well, this problem is huge and like we can't really get our arms around it. This sort of like gives people agency to take action. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Nadine. So, you know, bystander intervention is like one form of allyship. And so, are there any folks in your life who you think embody what it means to be a good ally? I'll kick us off. You know, I always like to uplift and honor my grandmother, and, you know, my grandmother, my aunts, and my mom, because they were some of the first bystanders in action that I grew up seeing, and not only on an interpersonal level, right, as women of color, but also speaking up for those who felt like they didn't have a voice. So, like speaking up for the folks who were houseless in our community, speaking up for women who were experiencing domestic violence, didn't have the resources that we have available to us now. You know, young LGBTQ youth who were kicked out of their homes. I saw them step in those moments and be advocates and support folks, and that's part of why I do this work. So I'll go ahead and pass it over now to Emily.
Oh goodness. I was just thinking about that. I was like, who are my favorite allies?
Mhm.
Gosh, we invited the people here in this room for a reason because y'all are all amazing allies. Obviously, you know, to the folks who you're here to serve, but also really recognizing that, you know, this work has to be intersectional or it just can't be. We can't imagine just one version of a journalist or one version of a woman walking down the street in DC, right? We have to think expansively about all the folks who are deeply impacted by these issues. You know, and I think, let's see, when I think about allyship in my own life and beyond that, I mean, yeah, I mean, it starts young. Like it starts really young. I'm actually at my mom's house right now, and my mom was a public school librarian, and used to joke that, you know, that her job was to be the librarian, right? But that there were two types of kids that really needed the library, and one was all the queer kids, and the other one was all the neurodiverse kids, right? And they both needed different things inside of that library environment. But she really saw her job in service of those two, you know, groups of kids inside of high schools that are underserved, that are not safe, right, in a lunchroom environment, that do need to hide out, right? And so I think that idea of kind of uplifting the folks who need to be uplifted most was really taught to me at such a young age.
Mhm.
And I'll pass it over to Victoria.
I'm going to give an honest answer, but I think she's going to be very embarrassed. And I'm not saying this purely out of flattery or to be, you know, cute. I really mean this. I thought of Emily, and I will tell you why. So Emily has been doing this work for well over 15 years now. And I started doing the work that I'm doing now around online abuse maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I initially like didn't totally know what I was doing. And there were many times when I went to Emily and I was like, Emily, can you give me advice on this? Can you give me advice on that? I'm not sure how to structure this. I want to do this ethically and carefully. And she was always willing to drop, as like an ED of an organization, was always willing to drop what she was doing and give me help and give me advice, and was so generous with her time and knowledge. And I have to say, I'm truly very, very grateful. And maybe I shouldn't have picked such a public and embarrassing place to say this to her, but I mean it. Yeah, so that's my answer. And of course, my grandmother. But that's we could cover my grandmother another time, who I also love very deeply. Oh, am I supposed to popcorn to someone? Nadine, you want to jump in?
I see Maya's got her mic on, so I think she had someone mind.
Oh, sorry, Maya, I didn't see you. Go ahead, Maya.
No, that's okay. I think I would say, well, first, I want to give a proper shout out to Councilmember Nadeau, the DC City Council, because she is the one that actually authored the Street Harassment Prevention Act, which Emily was singing the praises of in the beginning of this conversation. And I do think Councilmember Duo is actually a wonderful ally, and she is constantly putting forth bills and supporting her constituents in whatever they need. And then I would also say my advisory committee, that we had the advisory committee on street harassment. That was part of SHPA, the Street Harassment Prevention Act. The folks came from all different areas and agencies and nonprofits and groups, and they represented their communities, but also were thoughtful in including and striving for community care of everyone.
And I guess I would just, I would go back to our coalition against online violence, because I've really seen with that group of people, just a huge willingness to stand up for not only for the journalists and other folks that we're trying to support, but for each other. Because sometimes one of the things that happens when you're standing up for journalists is that then you come under attack. So I have seen that real solidarity and sense of caring from the other members of our coalition that I really admire.
I love that. So let's get personal, right? As we all know, this work is incredibly personal. That is part of the beauty and the challenge of it. We got into it because we cared about it for a personal reason. And then we get to, spend all day working that out for ourselves and our communities. I want to, one of the things that the book has is a quiz on what your superpower is. So which one of the 5 Ds is the thing that you feel like you would be most capable of doing, most willing to do, most likely to do? And we've heard from folks that they've gotten some surprising answers out of that quiz, but I want to hear from the 3 of you. Which one is your D of choice and why? And we'll start with Maya.
Thank you. So it used to be distract. And then I think since having a child, it's become direct. There's just something about becoming a mom that makes you much more to the point and protective and not held back by maybe some of the insecurities I would have had in the past.
I feel that. Yeah, I have 2 kids too, and I feel like you have to give children a lot of direct feedback all the time.
Yes.
Pick that up. Don't eat that, right?
Yes.
Don't walk off that ledge, right? And it gives you a lot of practice, right?
Yes.
For being more direct.
I'm also on Team Direct. In a long ago time, I used to work as a clinic escort for Planned Parenthood. So literally my job was to sort of be between women trying to get into Planned Parenthood and the people trying to harass those women on the street. So it really did give me the skills to be quite direct, and sometimes maybe even a little too direct.
So here's what's hilarious. I went the other trajectory, and I'll tell you why. My instincts were always not just my nature is to be very direct. And in the past, when I've been harassed, or where I've seen other women or other people being harassed, I get very protective and I get very aggressive. I get right into someone's face. Sometimes I yell. And so, honest to goodness, once I started to learn more about constructive forms of bystander intervention and less constructive forms of bystander intervention, I have actually sort of tried to tamp down a little bit on that, get right into someone's face and start cussing at them, which is my natural reaction to these situations. And I have leaned very heavily in delegate and distract. I can still do the direct, but now I have more tools about how to do it in a way that's helpful and not escalating the situation. So that's been my trajectory on the allyship scale.
I feel that, Victoria, because I am also naturally a super direct intervener. And so recently, I'd say in the last, maybe year or so, and doing the work, realizing that sometimes I'm not always the best person to intervene because, yeah, sometimes I get really angry, right? And I'm like, am I going to be able to like de-escalate myself if things don't go the way I plan in the situation? And so, similarly, I have been relying on delegate or actually some delay, which to be honest with you, never I never thought I would do, but then realized being here and seeing other folks employ it that I'm like, oh, that's actually like super valuable that someone cares enough about me that they're checking in with me. So yeah, I've been doing sort of the same.
Yeah, that's fun. Gosh, we're all in like some sort of like complicated relationship with direct. Um, I emotionally like identify. If you're like, what do you identify as? Are you a Pisces? Are you a Scorpio? I'm a delay. I'm a hard delay. I'm like, let's talk about this. Are you okay? That wasn't okay. I'm so sorry that happened to you. How can I support you right now? Um, but I actually feel like having done this work on bystander intervention for a minute, um, that's so much about the way that we teach direct that is not confrontational because I'm not a naturally confrontational person. We don't teach it to be confrontational. We teach it to just be like, hey, why don't you step it back? Right. And then I'm going to have a conversation with this person being harassed. I'm like, I can do that. I can set a boundary. I've got a 4 and a 6-year-old. I practice setting boundaries all day long. Right. So yeah, I feel like I'm like transitioning. I'm like in a transitionatory phase in my life where I'm just getting more and more direct, but kind. Set those hard boundaries gently is my preferred approach to direct. I am not like Victoria, you or Jorge, like ready to throw down. Be like, let me tell you, right? That is not my style, but I can flex over there.
Actually, what was kind of revelatory for me about the 5Ds is that I think it's very natural to think that the only kind of intervention is direct. And that actually there are all these other ways that are also allyship that are really meaningful that don't involve getting directly, in between a person and a harasser or getting directly into the face of a harasser, even if you're not aggressive or confrontational about it, that there are a lot of different ways you can step in. And I've noticed in our trainings that for a lot of people, that's revelatory.
Yeah, I feel you on that. I also think I think one of the D's that's an unsung hero is delegate. I think people are like, delegate, whatever. That's just like getting somebody else to do it. But delegate is actually like a community organizing tool, you know? It's like, all right, let's do this together. Like, I might not be super safe doing this. You might not be super safe doing this, but both of us are aligned that it's not okay. And I've got some knowledge on what we could do and stay safe. So, like, let's get it together and like do it together. And I feel like that's like really powerful in a way that people dismiss. Like, they don't want to be the person that just gives it to somebody else, right? But we all want to be the community organizer, right? Isn't that what Obama taught us? Community organizers are amazing. Or at least Jorge's mom taught us. All right, so I want to hear, have y'all actually got to use, anyone got some stories for me of using this D in real life, or any of the Ds in real life, and how's it going out there?
Well, I can speak to pre-pandemic times. I just because I haven't really been as out in the world as much, but I was on the metro, which is DC's subway, with a intern of sorts, and this intern is non-binary, and this older guy was harassing them, kind of saying things like across the metro card that, like, they would be prettier if they lost weight or something, just kind of, or like asking if you're a boy or a girl, and just really nasty, annoying stuff. And so then I, said to him, I was like, you don't need to comment on anyone's body, like leave them alone. And then he turned it on me and he started saying things to me. And I was actually pregnant at the time. So then I was like, I'm pregnant. And then it like switched for him completely. And he was like saying that he was so sorry and that like, I'm beautiful. Cause he was like, oh, you need to lose weight too. And then I was like, well, I'm pregnant. And he was like, oh, I'm so sorry. You're beautiful. So that was the one of the more recent times that I was able to use a direct. And then, of course, I was with the intern and doing delay work with checking in with them and helping them kind of process what had happened.
What's interesting is I found, I was just thinking lately, grabbing my morning coffee, waiting at the bank online, and I've noticed that because I was thinking about pre-pandemic and now, and pre-pandemic, right? Everyone was like in a rush. I feel like then during pandemic, folks were actually just excited or like happy to be out in public spaces. But I feel like here in New York City, at least, we're going back to like the hustle and the bustle, and everyone's in a rush. And so, what I have noticed a lot of is that folks are like really rude when they're getting things, or kind of like nasty to cashiers, or like the person serving them. And so I go to the Dunkin' Donuts every morning to grab a coffee, and at least 3 times a week, the person in front of me is like super rude to the whoever's serving their coffee for whatever reason it is. And I find myself like walking up to them, and the first thing just being like, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that, or like that you had that experience, and not realizing that you're doing some delay work there. You're checking in with that person and validating their experience. So for me, it's just so interesting how it's just been baked in now to how I interact with people on a day-to-day.
We do a lot of checking in, I would say, with journalists, just because often, your first inclination when you're seeing somebody get attacked online is that you want to show public support, right? You want to make a strong statement. We condemn this. The coalition condemns this, but we actually have to take a pause and to go to the journalist before we take any action, and just to ask them what would actually be useful to you in this situation. What would you like us to do? Is there any support we can offer? And maybe they don't actually want to have more amplification around the situation. Maybe they'd like some other kind of support, whether it's just knowing that we're there in the background. We can point them to resources for mental health or for digital security consultation. So just sort of giving the chance to, and unfortunately, there are just a lot of examples to pick from, because this is a constant battle that we're fighting. But giving the journalists that power to tell us exactly what it is that they'd like from us to do.
I love that. All right. Let me pass the torch back over to Jorge for this next question.
Yes. So, like our work of supporting each other, whether it be online, at work, like Emily mentioned before, is deeply personal for us. And I know some of y'all have shared, stories about if you've seen it happening out in the world, how did you show up? But I'd like to take it just a step deeper. And if any of y'all feel comfortable sharing, has there been a time where you were being harassed and no one stepped in to support you? And how did you manage through that, the trauma, and keep going? And so I would because I don't want to volunteer nobody this question. I feel like I want y'all to offer it. I will pause and I will let whoever feels comfortable sharing speak.
I can talk about it. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's happened to me many times. But there's one time that's especially egregious that stands out, which I think was a little bit of a turning point. Years ago, I was younger, and I was in a bar, and somebody, a man, an older man, came up and started groping me, and I did the thing that I just was describing earlier that I do, which is I got really aggressive. I slapped him. I got in his face. I started yelling at him. And then he got really aggressive. And then I got thrown out of the bar. He got to stay in the bar and I got thrown out of the bar. So not only did like nobody intervene, nobody stepped in to try to help, except for the friend who I was there with, like she was trying, she didn't know what to do because I was so angry and aggressive. But then I got punished for being groped. And I think it was a turning point in all kinds of ways. You know, part of it is that like because I was younger, I sort of like turned it into a haha jokey story as a way of kind of coping. And I think as I've gotten older, I think one of the things I learned is that it's important to be frank about how destructive and damaging and not funny and not jokey that kind of stuff is. And I think it's definitely, I think a lot of the reason I do the work that I do now has been because as a woman, I've experienced harassment in so many different places, so many different times. And so often nobody stepped in to help. And then occasionally people did, and that made a huge difference. And so I think it has definitely, experiences like that have shaped both the ways in which I think about allyship and sort of surviving things like that or getting through things like that, but also why I'm so interested in the work that I do now.
Thank you for sharing, Victoria. If you could, I guess, if you could say one thing to folks who have been harassed, if there's one thing you want them to know, what would that be?
It's not your fault. You did nothing wrong. And it's not okay, right? It's not okay. It's not funny. It's not something that can or should be brushed off by anyone around you. And whatever reaction you're having to it, as long as you're not engaging in physical violence, which I would discourage, even if that's my instinct in situations like that, you know, whatever your kind of reaction to it is an acceptable way to react to having someone violate your space and do you that kind of harm.
I have a story that's similar to that, Victoria, where I haven't thought about it for a long time until you just told that. But it was right after we started Hollaback, like the blog, not the organization that eventually became Right to Be, but like the blog. And I was riding the Greyhound on one of those just like late night bus trips. I don't even remember where I was going, but I was by myself and packed bus. And this man behind me like shoves his hand between the seats and starts groping my breast, right? And it was like one of those things that was so shocking. Like I was like, wait, what is happening? Like, and like I was also kind of asleep. I was like, what is going on? Like, what is happening? And I was like, damn, I just started this blog. You were like out there telling these stories of harassment and like taking pictures of these people, you know, and or of the scene or whatever. And I was so paralyzed by it that, you know, in my head, like I wanted to be the strong feminist activist who like stood up on the bus and like pointed at the guy and was like, you're fucking groping me, you asshole, right? And then everyone, you know, would like rise up and be like, you asshole, get off the bus, right? But in the reality, I knew that nobody would believe me. Like I knew that nobody would care. I knew that the bus was packed. There was nowhere else I could move to even sit. I knew I would just be like sort of like the pariah who like made a scene on the Greyhound, right? That I would become the problem because I was the one who stood up and started screaming, that I would be seen as insane because I had started screaming, right, about this guy who, you know, I'm sure he would say was just adjusting his hand, right, or whatever they say. And so I didn't. So we had just made these like little hollaback stickers. I can't remember exactly what they said, but I do remember it had a girl kicking on it. And I just stuck it on that little plastic bar, like in the seat in front of me. And I took a picture of that and then shared my story, and took that approach. But I wonder, I think now, I think I would have made a scene now, but I also think like that's a different context. Like I was 24 then, right? I'm 41 now. Like people are more likely to believe a 41-year-old mom than a 24-year-old girl. I've got resources. I can make phone calls. I know council members. Like there's like this sort of like power and privilege that I have now to do something, to say something, to be heard. I've got white privilege, I had that then too, but I didn't think it was going to be enough. And yeah, and so it was just like I didn't even give bystanders an opportunity because I just knew how it was going to go, because I'd seen it. I'd been so blamed for so long about so much the harassment that I'd faced, that I knew I was just going to make my life worse by trying to ask for help.
So I've had both the groping on public transit and the groping in bars, which it sounds like is a universal experience that we've had. One thing that happened to me when I was in college actually was one of our security officers. I was staying on campus for the summer and I was the only person in the dorm at that time. So I was moving some furniture around. I had like a sports bra on and like little shorts. And the security officer who would come into that building every day to check, he came in and he started talking to me, and we had talked before. And then he came into my room and he started asking me if I would pose naked for him for an art project that he was working on. So obviously I was really scared of him in that moment, also because he had a gun. But I sort of was, like, oh, well, let me think about it, and got him just like to leave my room. So I told a friend, and the friend helped me report it to one of the deans. And then I was called in for a meeting with the security officer there. And the dean was basically like, look, you were wearing really a revealing outfit and you should be more careful about how you're dressed. And this guy has 2 kids. And if you want to pursue this and you really want to like ruin his life, then let me know. So that was kind of an early education in, shaming for trying to do something about reporting.
That's exactly what allyship does not look like, right? It's the opposite of what allyship is supposed to. Nadine, I'm so sorry. How horrifying.
That story just gave me chills.
Yeah.
It was, I was really angry about it for a while. I still haven't ever donated to my alma mater as a result of that incident.
Thinking about y'all saying the universal experience of like being groped for a woman, I think of myself and other like before I recently lost like 140 pounds, but when I was a fat-bodied person moving the world, I still consider myself one. And other folks that I know, I think of like how normalized and pervasive it is to harass and be cruel to people who are fat in public. I can't tell you how many times I got called a fat fuck or whatever, told to go on a diet, like just constantly. And I think the part of that, which now I know is different, is that no one, like even the people who were like my quote unquote friends, right? Even some family members, like laugh it off or join in, or just like not even, oh, don't think about that. And to think about just like how normalized, to the point that now I realize I've lost 140 pounds, right? That like a big part of why I got that big was because I just got to this point where like, well, I'm gonna be treated like this because I'm fat. Like I'm a big bodied person no matter what. And so I didn't even for the longest time make like a concerted effort within myself to like want to do it, because I was gonna experience this. This was just how it was to be a big person. No one cared. It's not You know, it's not a big deal. You'll get over it. Grow a thicker skin. My family, some of my family members, well, you like to eat, right? So that's kind of what you have to deal with since you like to eat. Like some of the stuff that was told to me. So I think for folks who are in that position now, I would tell them, screw that. No one has the right to treat you that way. For folks who see that and don't say anything, you're just as bad as the person who's insulting them. Or not say anything, but like don't do anything at all, like even to try to like help that person. Or if you can help them get someone else, it's not normal. That's how I feel. Like it's not normal for anyone to talk to anyone that way. And so the least you can do is go up to that person at the end and let them know that they're beautiful just the way they are, and they have the right to be fat in public and wherever else. I will pass it back to Emily to take us to our, I guess, our closing question, huh?
Before we do, Maya, did you want to share? Totally optional. I just saw you go.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, I have similar experiences speaking to the universality of it all. Something that just like really stays with me is, so with our street harassment survey, you know, we surveyed as a citywide survey, but then we also did 10 focus groups of like particularly marginalized communities. So folks that don't speak English, folks experiencing homelessness, Black trans women, and there were several focus group participants that thought that this was like a support group, and they were asking like when they could come again, you know? So it just shows how prevalent and universal and how much people are seeking that care, community care, and wanting to be heard and validated.
And like this work is still so wildly under resourced, right? Like, you know, I think I'm probably not the only person in the room here who's actually run financial models for what would it look like if we held support groups, and we're like, we can't afford it. You know, because there's just not enough money in the movement to figure it out. Which sucks, right? We've got a long way to go. I think, you know, I think this is harassment is a problem that has obviously existed since the beginning of time. It is not a new one whatsoever. And yet we are really just in the beginning stages of starting to source solutions and resources to address it. And, you know, we've seen a lot of moments, right? But I think particularly just to look back at the past 5 years, we've seen, you know, after the 2016 elections, we saw the rise in Islamophobic harassment. We saw the rise in Black Lives Matter. We've seen the rise in conversations about Me Too. We've seen the rise in AAPI hate, right? And I'm curious, you know, you all are all here because you're experts in this field and you are leaders in this movement to address harassment. I'm curious, what do you see is the next frontier for the collective larger movement work that we need to do to meaningfully address harassment wherever it happens, whoever it happens to? So I'll open up the floor to whoever wants to throw in their ring on that one.
I can start. So I really see two major areas, I guess, for the next frontier. And I know these are not novel, and they might be, you know, really perfected elsewhere, but I feel like DC, engaging youth and also transforming those who cause harm. So firstly, if we could get bystander intervention taught in like late elementary school, early middle school, I think it could be transformative. And that would be much closer to primary prevention in public health speak than teaching bystander intervention to adults. And then secondly, if we look at the actions as opposed to the person as bad, I think the work would be more approachable in working with those that cause harm. So if we have, also if we have like credible messengers from the same group or identity talking about harassment and its harms, I think the message would be received more effectively. So I don't know about you all, but I've always found that the folks that are eager and willing to take bystander intervention are usually folks from like a marginalized identity. And that's probably because they've experienced street harassment themselves. So they have that empathy and they know what it feels like and they want to help somebody else that's experienced it. So I think like the next step is to really engage the people that are more closely aligned with those that are causing harm.
I love that. I love that. And just for context, we are working on the 5Ds for kids K through 12 curriculum as we speak, and really investing a lot of organizational resources in testing and monitoring and evaluation, because we don't just want it to be like a cool curriculum for the cool teachers that are probably already going to teach their kids some variation of it anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
We really want to move it to scale and get it moved into policy, and it takes a lot of evidence-based research to get there. But I think I've taught bystander intervention to 7-year-olds personally, right? We've developed videos that we'll try and share a link to for kids ages 3 to 10 on how to intervene. And it's all possible, right? And yet for some reason we think the only thing we can teach kids to do is to tell their teacher. But kids need as many options as we as adults do to be able to show up into this. So yes, thank you. There's the link to those videos. They're free. Share them far and wide. And Distract looks different for kids, right? It's like, hey, do you want to play with me? Right? Different approaches for little kids, but the methodology still works. Document for the little tiny ones without the phones is to take a picture with your mind, right? Mm-hmm. So that then you can remember like what happened. You can talk to somebody about it. But the idea is that we got to give kids power, I think, to create the world that they want to live in. We can't just, tell them to delegate their power off to their teacher every single time this happens. And we also got to teach kids that like, look, bullying isn't some like equal opportunity thing. Like the kids getting bullied are like the queer kids, the neurodiverse kids, the kids of color. Like, it's not like, the cute, hot soccer player, that's getting the brunt of the bullying. So I'm with you on that and excited to advance that forward in the movement. And also want to uplift, this concept that you said too about folks who create harm. We have so much work to do in that space. I think first and foremost, we have to wrap our heads around the fact that we all create harm, created at different levels in different ways. And so we got to heal those parts inside of ourselves. We've got to see the humanity in others who create harm because they have also experienced harm, right? So I think there's a lot of framework work to be done there in terms of how we even think about that. Victoria, what about you? What's next up in the movement?
I really want organizations to join forces to help us understand how to be better digital citizens. I think that it's so funny if you think about it. We've all been thrown onto the internet. Like we're all online, especially during pandemic, like we're all online all the time, but none of us have ever learned either how to keep ourselves safe on the internet or what it means to be a good digital citizen. And so I think I would really like to see everyone on the internet, ambitiously, she says, have some basic bystander intervention training so that if you see someone who's being harassed online, you have ideas about how you could step in and be supportive and be helpful without escalating. In the same way that for many, many years now, Right to Be has been leading the movement to deal with street harassment. So, and I know expanding your remit also to think about the online space. So I think that's what I would really like to see. I want people to get training in how to be digital citizens who don't do harm to one another.
I love that. Maybe we could like collectively just get the entire world together to come up with like
Oh,
community agreements for how we're going to be online.
Emily and I like to think big. Scale is no object.
I'm sure we got some great facilitators between us. We can facilitate that conversation, right? Like get a Miro board going. Like we're organizers. We can do it.
Some serious translation budget if it's going to be worldwide.
Oh, that is going to be a limiting factor. Well, we know some cool people. We'll find them. Where there's a will, there's a way. Nadine, what do you think is next up for us?
Well, I'm gonna put on my sort of journalism world hat again, and just as an organization that focuses a lot on the safety of journalists, I really would like to sort of reframe the way the conversation is happening about duty of care, which often, for managers in newsrooms, they're talking about when they're putting a journalist into a war zone, they need to have a flak jacket, they need to have a helmet, they need to have hostile environments trainings, and that's a part of duty of care that I think is pretty widely agreed upon. But I'd like to see our industry and sort of more broadly, all industries really focus on harassment as also part of the duty of care, that they have an obligation to be proactive in putting in place protocols and measures, and taking a lot of the great advice that you've compiled from bystander intervention and applying it to the kinds of threats that we're seeing, particularly journalists of color, LGBTQI journalists, women journalists facing both online and offline, but particularly in the online abuse space, to treat that as just as valid, as serious of a safety issue that they need to tackle as the things that are happening maybe in a conflict environment. So that's what I would like to see.
I would like to see that too. I think that would be amazing. I don't even think we have like the basic acknowledgement when people apply for these jobs as journalists that they're going to get harassed. Like I don't even think there's like a consent form that you sign when you like sign up for journalism school at this point. So I mean, I think we have there's a tremendous amount of space to create that change. Jorge, what about you? Tell me what's coming up in your crystal ball right now.
Well, I was listening about like being a better like a digital citizen, thinking about this journalism piece. I did media and communications as a minor, and I remember all these courses I took. When you kind of learn like history of journalism and stuff, particularly here in the US, I feel like it's almost impressed upon you that that's what's going to happen in the role if you step in to be a journalist. Like part of it, this is what you have to accept, something that you were alluding to earlier, Nadine. And so I think some work that I like to see us, and I think we're headed in that direction as an organization, is how do we continue to equip folks in these spaces, not just through training, but really through giving them the tools to organize themselves, right? Like, and when I say organize themselves, like how do you activate people when there is a moment of harm in a digital space? How do you start to like ask for change, whatever it is, policy change in journalism field, or ethics, code of ethics changes? Like how do we let people know let the people know that power is not, we don't have to delegate it away, right? That there is things that we can do on a personal level, that both, bystander intervention having like a more immediate impact, but that also there's like this middle ground and then this longer term impact, and that all the work that we're doing, regardless of when it fully comes to fruition, is important for us to continue. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm ruminating on. I'm thinking of like, yeah, how do we get some community groups started? Part of the work that we're looking at doing in our movement building is launching these community groups across cities where folks are empowered, to respond when there's an incidence of harm, harassment. And I'm thinking, what would that look like in a virtual setting in an online environment? And so that's what's percolating for me right now.
Thank you so much for that. I don't know about y'all, but I'm pretty excited for the future. I think we got this. We're gonna lead this in a beautiful place. So proud to be doing this work alongside each of you. Maya, Nadine, Victoria, thank you so much for joining Jorge and I. I also want to uplift Unique and Colin, our producers in the background, for doing such an awesome job on this. And thank you all. We're gonna keep on keeping on. We're gonna strengthen this movement. We're gonna make harassment a thing of the past. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for having us. Bye, everyone.
Bye.